Hi, my name's Kyle, and in this video, I'll be showing you the process of running your LÖVE 2D games on your Android device. This has been possible ever since version 10.0, and it works very well. This process works with any LÖVE project, but of course, it'll work best with a game suited for mobile. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using this very simple mobile game that I put together. You'll probably recognize what game I took inspiration from, but that's okay. As a side note before we start, if you'd be interested in the details of making a mobile game, check out my full course on Udemy. The link is in the description. By the way, if you join the course, you'll get the full source code and assets for this mobile game that I'm demoing with, which makes for a great reference as you're developing games of your own. Back to the topic at hand. To get your game on mobile, we'll need to use our LÖVE code to generate an APK file, which is essentially an Android app. Once we have the APK, we can transfer it to our device, install it, and play our game. At one point, it was possible to run .love projects on Android without generating an APK, but at the time of recording this, it appears to not be possible anymore. If this changes, I'll upload another video to show off that process, and I'll include a link here. It's not very much slower, though, to just generate and install an APK, but there is a bit of setup. We'll need to install several different Android-related tools to our computer and set up the environment a bit. Once that's ready, it's a pretty simple process to get the app created and installed. Let's get started. We're going to go through the steps involved with getting your game ready to use on an Android device. This involves taking our game code and packaging it into a .apk file, which is essentially an app. There are plenty of tools out there that make this possible and relatively simple for us to do. It just involves a little bit of setup. There are three main tasks that we'll need to do. First, we'll need to clone and set up the LÖVE Android repository on our computer. This is the official LÖVE tool that's used to port your game to mobile. It does all the heavy lifting during this process. We give it our game code, run a few commands, and it generates our APK. Next, we'll need to get the Android SDK on our computer. Here, SDK stands for Software Development Kit. And the Android SDK is a series of tools that make developing mobile apps possible. It includes all the required libraries for your app, which is why we need it. And it also comes with a bunch of other helpful things that mobile developers use, such as the Android emulator. And finally, we'll need to get the Android NDK. Here, NDK stands for Native Development Kit. This is what allows our LÖVE-based project to be compatible with Android. So it's a very important component to this packaging process. Let's kick things off by cloning the LÖVE Android repo. You can find it at github.com/love2d/love-android. We're going to use git to clone this. So to do this, I'm just going to grab the URL from this. And we're going to go to the folder where we want to actually clone LÖVE Android. For me, I'm doing it in C dev. Now to actually clone, we need to open up some command line window. I'm going to open up PowerShell. So I'm going to do Shift, right click, open PowerShell window here. And then in addition to doing just a git clone, we need to add an additional flag here. That's --recurse-sub modules, just like that. And then after that, we need to paste in the URL that we copied from the GitHub page for LÖVE Android. And then I'm just going to click enter. So right now, it's downloading a bunch of dependencies for LÖVE Android. That's what the recurse submodules field does. And we're just going to let it run and install. And it's done. We can close out of this, and we can see that LÖVE Android has cloned onto our dev folder. Next up, we're going to go ahead and get the Android SDK installed, which we do this by actually installing Android Studio. We can get Android Studio by going to developer.android.com, and then we'll click on this Android Studio tab. And I'm just going to download Android Studio. It'll take a moment, it's kind of a large file. And once it's done downloading, let's go ahead and start it up. Just go ahead and click next on all this stuff. Once that's done, we'll click Next and make sure we can start Android Studio. I'll click Finish. So we're not actually using Android Studio as I mentioned before. We just need it for the SDK. And we can get that information by going to Configure SDK Manager. So on this page, it actually lists out our Android SDK location. So what I need you to do is copy this whole thing, and we're going to save it to some text document. We're going to use this later in the video. So that takes care of the SDK. Next is the NDK, which very conveniently we can do right here. Go to SDK Tools, and then find this NDK side by side here. Click on that. Click Apply. It says the following components will be installed, NDK. Click OK. It'll take a while to download and install. So once it finishes downloading, don't close it yet. We actually need one thing from here. If you look closely, we will see the path to the NDK right here. So I'm going to copy this. And once again, I'm going to save it in that text file for safekeeping. And from here, we can close out of this and click OK. We're actually done with Android Studio entirely. There's one last step, and that's to create some environment variables for these paths that we copied out. On Windows, if you want to edit your environment variables, you can go down to the bottom and type in environment, and there it is, edit the system environment variables, choose environment variables, and then here's a list of all of our user variables for Kyle J, or whatever your username will be. We're going to click New. And I should mention that if you are not on Windows, be sure to look up a guide on how to add environment variables for your operating system. It's normally a pretty simple process. But we need two variables. The first one we need is called Android_home. That's all caps. And then the variable value is going to be the path to the SDK, which we kept safe right here. I'm going to copy this and put it right in here. And then click OK. And you can see we now have our new environment variable, Android Home. Next, we need to add one more. This is going to be called Android_NDK_home. And once again, we need to put in the path to our NDK, which is this one. And we'll paste that right in there. And that takes care of our environment variables. We can close out of this. I should mention that those paths that we copied out and that you added to the environment variables, make sure that you have easy access to them. If you want to sign your app later on, you will need them. So that about covers everything we need to install to get things going with mobile. Next up, we'll go through the actual process of using LÖVE Android in order to generate the APK. Now that everything is installed, we just need to get our game code ready, and then we're going to run a simple command with LÖVE Android. Before we pack everything up, an important thing that we should add to our project is a config file, or a conf.lua. This type of file allows us to change certain configurations about our game. So I'm going to do new text document, or however you want to do this. Essentially, this file just needs to be called conf.lua. And that involves changing it from a text file to a Lua file. Now, if you can't see the extensions for these files, like the .lua here, you just need to go to View and then check this box for File Name Extensions. So once we have this file created, let's go ahead and edit it with whatever text editor you want to use. I'm going to use Sublime Text. Now in here, we just need to add a little bit of code. I'm going to write function love.conf and then pass it t. Now in this function here, we're going to add a few different properties and make adjustments on them. For instance, we could set t.modules.joystick equals false. What this does is it turns off the joystick module from LÖVE entirely. By doing this, we're decreasing the startup time because the joystick module is pretty big, and if we don't need it, like in our case, we don't need it because it's a mobile game, this will save us some time when we're starting up the game. An additional one that is necessary for what we're doing is t.external storage equals true. When I made my first mobile game with LÖVE, I found that in certain devices, the save functionality wasn't working. And as it turned out, I needed to enable external storage for those devices in order to save. One other set of properties that's useful here is defining our game window size, as in the width and the height. This normally isn't too important to do in conf.lua, but for mobile games, it uses the aspect ratio that you define in this file to determine initially if the game should be played in portrait or landscape mode. So I'm just going to put in t.window.width equals 720 and t.window.height equals 960. These values match the core gameplay window for my game. Since you should be defining window size in your game code already, the actual values that you put in here don't matter too much. What's more important is the aspect ratio. If you want your game to run in portrait mode, you'll need a smaller width than height. If you want landscape, you'll make the width a larger number. In my case, since 720 is less than 960, the game will default to portrait mode. And that should cover everything we really need for this file. I encourage you to look up the LÖVE wiki for conf.lua to see all the different game properties you can adjust from this file, since it's pretty useful. Now that everything's ready, we just need to create a .love file, which is sort of a packaged version of our game. It's really simple actually. We can turn this project into a .love file by selecting all these files and then sending it to a zip file, or compressing this whole project. You'll know that you did this step correctly if, with the zip that we created, you can go directly inside of it, and then you'll see a main.lua. If you don't see a main.lua directly inside the zip, then this will not work. And once you have this zip file created correctly, we're actually going to change the name of it from fonts.zip to game.love. It must be this exact name. And keep in mind, we are changing it from a zip file to a LÖVE file. And you'll notice that when you do this, the icon for that file changes to a LÖVE icon. That's because it's now a LÖVE file and it can be run with LÖVE. If this step doesn't work for you, it's probably just because you don't have LÖVE in your path, but that's fine. As long as you have game.love, you're in good shape. So now that we have our LÖVE file, we're going to copy it, and we're going to go back to LÖVE Android. In here, we need to navigate to app, source, main, and then we need to create a new folder in here called assets. And then we're going to go inside assets folder, and we're going to paste our LÖVE file. Now, before we actually use LÖVE Android to turn this LÖVE file into an app, there's one important step that we should do, and that's adjust the Android manifest. So I'm going to edit this with Sublime Text again. And here we can see the Android manifest. At first glance, this seems a little bit confusing, but really all that it's doing is it's taking a bunch of different properties and setting different values for them. For instance, there's a few that you might want to edit. One being this Android label. This is going to be the name of our application as it appears on people's phones. So I'm going to change this from LÖVE for Android to LÖVEbird, like the name of the app. I'm going to do the same thing down for this label as well. Another important one is this screen orientation. Our game does not run in landscape. Instead, it runs on portrait mode, which is the vertical orientation for Android devices. That should be all we need to change in here for now. So I'm going to save and close out of this. And at this point, we're ready to package our game. To do this, we're going to go back to the root directory, LÖVE Android. And from here, I'm going to open up PowerShell or whatever command line. And we have one simple command to run. This is going to be /gradle w assemble normal, just like this. And if you're running on a non-PowerShell window, you probably don't need these, but I'm going to include them because I am on PowerShell. So that's all we need. I'm going to click enter. And it's going to download a bunch of stuff at first. You might get firewall warnings, which you can just allow. And it finished for me. You can see that it took 11 minutes and 28 seconds. Now that is a long time, but the next time you run, it'll be much faster than this. The first time is always the longest. Now that we're done with that, we can see our build output by going to App, Build, Outputs, APK, Normal, Debug, and then there it is. This is our APK file that we'll be putting onto our phone in order to run it. And every time you want to create a new build for your device, all you need to do is go back to App, Source, Main, Assets, change out your game.love file with a new version, and then run that same command again to get new build outputs. So with that said, we're ready to move on and talk more about how we can get this APK file installed on our device. We were successfully able to generate an APK, or application, from our LÖVE game. Now that we have this, all that we need to do in order to play this is to install it on our Android device. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using my Google Pixel 3a, but this process should be essentially the same no matter what device you're using, as long as it's running some version of Android. First, I'm going to connect my phone through a USB cable, and if I check the Explorer, I can see that I have it displayed over here. However, you likely will just see that it's empty. There's nothing to see here. If this is the case, you'll just need to go onto your phone, and if you swipe down to see your notifications, you should see your phone's connectivity status. If you tap on that, you should see the option for File Transfer. Once you select that, go back to your computer and you should be able to see the internal storage for your device. Once you're in, I like to keep things organized, so I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it Debug Apps. And then in here, this is where I'm going to put our APK file that we generated in the previous lecture. And paste. So with that, our game is officially on our device. Next, we need to actually install the app. Just putting the APK in a folder on your phone isn't going to do anything noticeable. To install it, we'll need some kind of file browser for your device. If you go on the Google Play Store and search for File Explorer, you'll find lots of options. Pretty much any of them are good. I personally like this one called File Manager by Xiaomi Inc., which is what I'll be using in this video. But again, they're all basically the same. Once you install and open up the app, navigate to where you can see all of your internal files. In my app, it's this button up here. You should see that Debug Apps folder that we created earlier. So click on that and we'll see our game. At this point, if you tried to click on it to install it, it probably won't let you. By default, Android devices won't let you install untrusted applications. And since this app isn't coming from the Google Play Store, it's considered not trusted, even though we know exactly where it came from. We made it ourselves. This means we need to allow our phone to accept apps such as these. To do this, you want to go to your Settings application and then navigate to Apps and Notifications, go to Advanced, Special App Access, and Install Unknown Apps. And then in here, you'll want to find the app that you're going to be using to install this application. In my case, it's File Manager. And then you just need to select Allow from the source. Now, go back to your File Manager and try to install it again. It should work this time. If Play Protect blocks the application from being installed, go ahead and install it anyway. Since this is the app we created ourselves, it's safe. Once it's installed, you should see it available like any other app on your phone. Run it and play it. Next time you go to install the Debug app on your phone, it'll be much quicker. Just put the APK file in your Debug Apps folder and install it with your File Manager. At this point, you know the steps needed to test your games on an Android device, so you'll be able to fully develop your games. When it comes time for you to publish your Android application, you just need to generate a different version of this APK. Instead of using the assemble normal command for LÖVE Android, you'll just do assemble. This will generate a new Play Store folder with a release build. At that point, you'll need to sign the app and publish. If you'd like to learn more about signing your application and publishing to the Google Play Store, Or if you'd like more insight in developing mobile games with Love2D, be sure to check out my full Love course on udemy.com. This course goes through the process of creating 3 full Love games, assuming no prior knowledge. It teaches you all you need to know about Lua programming, as well as anything that you might need to create 3 full games, as well as information on mobile game development. You'll also get the full source code for the mobile game I use in this video, which you can use however you like. The link is in the description, and using that link will automatically apply a discount code. That about covers everything I wanted to discuss in this video. Leave any questions in the comments, and if you'd like more Love2D related content, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.